What's happening, Panda Nation? Peter Von Panda here. Let's take a trip to Ottawa, Ontario. Now, I actually have to go to Ottawa, Ontario for some work, and so we're flying from Chicago to Dulles in Washington, D.C., and then to Ontario because I can't fly to Ottawa directly. Now, one of the funny things about O'Hare is that there is an overpass where the planes will taxi and go over the highway, which is kind of cool. And if you're on that highway, seeing the planes directly above you sometimes is pretty cool. And as required by YouTube law, I have to show you a view from the plane as we're taking off downtown Chicago. This is right on Lake Michigan. It's pretty impressive. You can see all the tall buildings. Pretty cool. Now, the first leg of my flight was on an Airbus A320, which is a pretty large plane. I think it's roughly the equivalent of the Boeing 737. Obviously, it has some big engines, so you get a nice view and you cruise pretty quickly. In first class, it is 2x2 seatings with leather seating surfaces, as you might expect. There's nothing really dramatic about these seats, but they are actually a little bit more modern than some of the other first class seats that are still in service on other airlines. Because the way the struts are positioned underneath the seats, you actually have three under-seat areas to store your luggage. Now, that is perfect for the 3x3 seating, but it makes it a little weird in first class where you only have two seats. Now, it's actually absolutely fine. You still have plenty of legroom, but you do end up having either someone putting their luggage in the center area. Now, there are a bunch of storage areas under the armrests. You could definitely use them for tablets or phones, but I would worry about forgetting them. There is a power outlet right in between the seats too, so it's definitely a good place to charge them, but man, they are a little bit out of the way. You can absolutely recline the first class seats too. The recline is pretty nice, and in fact, one thing that was unique about this is not only does the back portion recline, but the lower seat cushion actually moves out forward. And so what that does is it doesn't put you so far into the person behind you, and so it kind of maximizes the amount of space that you actually have dedicated to your seat, which is kind of nice. The center console has a little like marble looking tray for drinks, and the tray table comes out of that center armrest. Now, I actually didn't use it because this flight was only about an hour and the food service was just snacks and drinks. They did provide a little delicious muffin scone thing, and it was warmed up, so that was quite tasty. And then I also had a beverage. You can get pretty much anything you want. Now, on my connecting flight in Washington, I was actually on a much smaller airplane, a CRJ 700. So this is your typical regional jet. I think they would make perfect personal private jets. And the seating configuration on this, because it's much smaller, is 1x2. And if you're flying alone like I was, it's kind of nice to be on that left side so you have a seat all by yourself. Plenty of legroom here. You could get your backpack underneath the seat in front of you and kind of straddle it, or what I like to do sometimes is putting my toes underneath my backpack so that I can stretch out even a little further. This seat had its tray table in the armrest, as you would expect, and a little tray for single drinks. Now, I think United is doing quite a bit to invest in the first class seats on regional jets, but these are pretty standard older seats, blue leather. They do recline, so if you want to get some shut-eye, you can on this flight. Now, I wanted to mention the overhead bins. On the right side, you have kind of your standard overhead bins, but on the left side, those bins don't actually open because there is no space in them. So even though I wanted to put my backpack up top, I couldn't do it on this particular airplane. And again, this leg of the trip is pretty short, but I did want to get prepped for a delicious meal that would include my choice of beverage, alcoholic or not, and some of those delicious Cheez-Its. At this point, I was getting pretty hungry, and so I do want to admit that I bought a ham and Swiss sandwich in the airport before I got on the flight. Well, a little delayed, but made it here to the capital of Canada, Ottawa. It's pretty cold, snow on the ground. Good thing I brought my winter jacket. So let's get through customs and get to the hotel. The capital of Canada. Nice, friendly people. Gets a little chilly in the winter. Now, my return trip was pretty much a mirror of my outbound trip, but there were some pretty interesting and fun things that I want to mention. First of all, I got in the front row right against the bulkhead, and so it's basically the same seat, but you have to find a place to put your bag in the overhead bin because there's nowhere to put it in front of you. Now, the layover in DC actually has a terminal that apparently is pretty far away from the main terminal, and so you get off and you collect your carry-on baggage there. Now, this would be nice to let people know because it was freezing out there and everyone was standing out there waiting for their bags. Now, once I hightailed it and got to my connecting flight, I actually had Adam Schiff on my flight going back, and he was actually in my row. No surprise there, first class, so I'm not sure what he was doing in Chicago. Now, I'm not sure if he's kind of quirky or there's some special security procedures because you have a congressman on the plane, but it was a little weird, and if you ever run into me in person, I'll tell you about it. It is nice to be in the bigger seats, though, after a long day of working. When we got back to O'Hare, someone was having a bad day. There were emergency vehicles out. I didn't see any news on it, so I'm hoping that it was all just precautionary. But that was my trip from Chicago to Washington, D.C. to Ottawa and back again. If you want to book a great deal on your next trip, check out the link in the description below. Peter Von Panda. Out!